I bid you welcome back to yet another flip through video, because you must have really enjoyed the last one. In this one I will show you my very first graphics design portfolio, but what's important to say is that this is not a final and personal portfolio. This is the thing that we had to make at the end of a 900 hours long course. And in the last video I showed you my final project for that course, which was making this 13 pages long comic sample, and I flipped through this entire thing, which I'm not going to do right now. This is the final version. I was showing you a prototype in the last video, and I will very briefly talk about what are the changes that I did with this one. But first I will show you the portfolio itself, and there is also a little blend documentation for the comic itself that was also mandatory for us to make. And obviously this thing has my dead name all over it, so I just taped it over, and also it is written in Hungarian, but I will very briefly translate everything that you can see here so you can get the entire vibe from it. And yes, obviously this is not like a professional grade portfolio. This would need to go through many changes, many things would be cut from this if this was actually something that I would submit somewhere. But I really wanted to show you what I've been working on in these roughly 14 months that I spent working on this one and the comics. So let's get into it and do a really quick flip through. Also, I'm using my microphone stand as the camera stand, so I can only use one hand at a time because I'm holding my microphone. Yeah, this thing also has my dead name right here, so I added the little graphic from the side of my streaming setup for this as just a decoration piece. And this first section is for traditional artworks. I also got the definition and a little picture of my setup here. So this course was called Art-Focused Graphics Design, so we did traditional works as well, and also learned art history, and these are some of the mandatory exercises that we had to do. For example, a cloth hanged from two pieces that I immediately turned into a self-portrait. And this is this is the kind of overkill stuff that I did with some of these little projects, and also some other chair and cloth study drawings. Really nothing special. It's the kind of stuff that we can show that we did these too. Here we have some more still lifes, graphite, watercolor, acrylic ink. This is more of a fantasy picture that I've done. This is actually the only single acrylic ink picture that I ever did. I'm not gonna be showing you all of these in a video. I have them stashed away in a folder. Further studies from skeletons, details of the face, and here I just included this random little watercolor painting because it fit the theme. Monochromic watercolor portrait from imagination, graphite portrait study, and also some colorful, expressive little watercolor portraits that I made in A5. These were not for the course, these were made for just fun, but I wanted to include them alongside with some more fantasy pictures. I made these for Day of the Dead last year. This might be my most complex watercolor painting ever. I have a video about this on the channel. It's a random winter landscape that I did for my mother for Christmas. Now, I didn't make any proper perspective drawings traditionally for this, but I had some of these 5-point perspective tryouts laying around inspired by the Addams Family. This is literally the Addams Family house. I also have a video about these projects on my channel. This one went really off rails with the crazy perspective, but then I ended up really liking it. Because of that reason, it feels much more unique than the majority of house picture attempts that people do regularly. Also, the famous Gives Lucifer statue little study with watercolor. Not watercolor, graphite. I really don't like the face of this, but overall I'm satisfied with how it turned out. Now we get to vector graphics, and I started to include the programs that I've been using. So I used some of Adobe Illustrator at the start, but I really quickly switched to Inkscape because that's an open source alternative. And here we have a picture of my own boot that I use in order to turn it into this gradient mesh picture. Yes, that thing is actually a vector image. I broke down my picture, my boot into little pieces, and then I constructed it in vector graphics, and then I used a bunch of gradient meshes to colorize it, and my PC was about to absolutely just blow up by the end. This is not even funny. Yeah, I would never do this. This is horrible and an insane amount of work for what you could do with most likely with an image trace 85% away towards the final piece. But this was a cool experience though. Vector characters, I used this old sketch that I had laying around in a sketchbook, and then I turned it into two pets digitally in pixel graphics, and then I turned this into a vector picture, which took me so long, so needlessly. I like hand drew every single little detail on the characters, and oh, it's all right, I would say. Here's a cocktail poster menu thingy, and what I did here, we just had to do some cocktails on this one poster, but then I turned it into like a little visual story that this is a Bloody Mary cocktail poster that has like different tiers, with starting out just a regular Bloody Mary, which is, you know, vodka and tomato juice, and then you go towards actually having blood and an eyeball in it, and it's made out of human blood, and then there's like a special recipe that also has a little human teeth in it, and it's served in a goblet. So it's not just unconnected little elements, but they tell a story through the progression of this poster. Here we have, I could even know what this thing is called in English. It is a design for a toy store where I went with a cardboard box and little puzzle pieces element. And also the logo is a little teddy bear face that is made out of like this very strange and unique shaped puzzle piece. Here are some text, some pictures with text. So this one is the missing poster with the little line over the letter A in Hungarian missing from the poster, and there's the picture that shows it before. And here's chainsaw, which was cut through a chainsaw, and ghost, where the little L actually has a little sheet ghost design drawn on it, and I very carefully placed it on the letter itself, so it actually feels like the sheet was placed on it. Here we have some letter portraits. This one is a portrait that is made entirely from the word portrait in Hungarian. The entire thing was like hand placed. The entire thing was hand placed, and it took way longer than it should have. And the other thing that also took way longer than it should have is my main character from the comic Sunshine, whose portrait is entirely made out of text, where every single text has the name of the color repeated infinitely. So for example, this red line and the red of the lips is just the text red, 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 red all over again. And you know, if this camera would focus properly, I could show you. Yeah, ooh, there it is. It's much better now. The red, the black parts of the eyes were like all hand placed, and I just placed little single letters for the highlights. And overall, that entire portrait was a huge experiment that didn't go as well as I expected. Like this looks pretty rough around the edges, but you can see the concept. Here we have some 4 seasons tarot cards featuring, you know, different characters for the 4 seasons, and the outline, the border of the cards, they are all unique, and those are the things that were made as vector graphics. So for example, all these little flowers and the balloons and the cobweb on the border of the cards were made entirely in Inkscape, and the characters themselves, they were made as pixel graphics with a hard round brush. And I used the image trace, which is not called image trace in Inkscape, it's called trace bitmap, in order to turn these into vector illustrations, and then combined the two of them, so I have these vector cards that are actually properly vector based. I actually told a few people about this, that in Hungary there is this very strange thing. I have no idea who came up with this. I could have even looked it up for this video, that you can offer 1% of your taxes to any, I think, like very specific like charities or non-profits. I think the thing is that you have to give it to something that is non-profit, and that's the only restriction. And I came up with a charity service for Frankensteinian monsters. We had to make a roll-up with this, and I made this roll-up using some of my old digital paintings, and the entire thing is made out of like pieces of skin, including these speech bubbles. For example, where my character Sunshine here says, "Did you know every single Hungarian forint covers the cost of 1 stitch?" And if you look at this little poster, the way it progresses, it shows the stages of the healing process. Like first, it's like a very cut up skin with metal pieces holding it together. Then we go to simple stitching, and then it is then the healing wound in the end. So the entire thing tells a little story across it. You know, the kind of stuff that nobody would ever notice, but I found that this was gonna be something cool to add. Okay, give me a second for these ones. Now this one is one of my 2 absolutely favorite projects from this entire collection. We had to design 2 chocolate boxes for this thing called White Fruits. I think this is like a fictional thing that somebody came up with for this project. And we had to pick any 2 flavors and design 2 boxes for them. So here's what I did. I made 2 whole traditional watercolor paintings. These are in A5. This is the size. You can compare it to my hand. These were completely traditionally painted with black and with red. Those were the only 2 colors that I used for these. And we have a zombie and we have a vampire looking very nasty right here. And the 2 flavors that are featured in this are, we have blood orange and walnut, because walnut looks like brain, you know. And for these designs, I only used black and red digitally, and I actually found the Pantone color for the red that matches my watercolor the closest. So this is like monochromatic with just 1 color added in the entire design. And also these have a unique little box with the little bats and the little castle and with the handprints and a city in the background. And then, you know, you make this kind of, I could even know what it's called in English. You turn this into a vector image and design the box itself this way. And then I used Blender to turn this into actual box mockups that can be placed into any sort of surrounding. Then I just literally went out to the staircase at night with a little flashlight. I placed it down to the ground in order to lit up this little like opening where the stairs start. And then I edited my little pictures here for this poster, and now it says like this is a look for our Halloween collector's edition boxes at the store shelves, you know, now with the new walnut and blood orange flavors, and it is there with the little monster designs. And this was absolutely one of those projects where I absolutely loved working on this one. I know that it's like very morbid, but this is something that makes it unique. And you know, when we started this course, our teacher told us to like always put something of ourselves into these, obviously with certain restrictions, but I really wanted to lean into this this horror narrative with the monsters being used as the mascots for the different chocolate boxes. And also I ended up with a couple of very cool traditional paintings. These are actually some of my favorite traditional watercolor paintings. Next up we have this stuff that is actually my thing, which is pixel graphics, the thing that I've been working on since 2016. And I made everything that you see in this section entirely in Krita, the open source Photoshop alternative I cannot stop talking about. Creative masking, I turned one of my own pictures into Sunshine from my comic, my original character. And for this one, obviously, I used a whole bunch of adjustment layers to colorize my face that way. But also, I did a bunch of hand painting for all the stitches. I hand painted little eyelashes and highlights into the eyes. I hand painted. It's not really visible on this camera image. I will try to do the focus properly. Come on, there we go. I painted little teardrops and the cuts over Sunshine's face that is important for the lore, and I replaced the background and I hand painted this entire rim light, and I even edited parts of my hair, so I will have this side cut that Sunshine has. Obviously this part was also hand painted partially, and I even edited some of my features. You know, I pushed some bones around so I resemble Sunshine more than myself. I'm really not beating the Sunshine being a self-insert allegations here, right? Here we have a Rob Zombie poster that I made over a year ago. If I had to make a musician poster today, I would most likely do a Theater of Tragedy. I've been listening to a lot of Rob Zombie back then, and I just freshly saw most of his movies. What I did here was I created this pentacle design out of just material textures, and then I placed the pictures inside it. Pretty basic stuff, but if you do it right, then you can create something cool looking like this. Montage with past and the present. So I found an archive picture of this street, and I used the Google Street View image in order to create this little picture cutouts that show the past and the present of this street, and all the little imperfections in this picture were all hand painted. So this is not just the most simple, you know, using clipping masks. I actually went over it and did some cutting, and also I like lowered the quality of the present picture, and I added noise to it and all that in order to bring them closer together. Little tricks that you can use when making designs like this. We had to make 2 posters for cities, and this is one of them, New Orleans. This is possibly one of the most simple ones in this entire collection. I used the indent and embowel effects on this little text. I unfortunately couldn't find what font I used, so this is like forever lost possibly. And I used very simple shapes to create this fence that then I turned into a 3D thing with the layer effect and with some textures added to it, and I used pictures from the different like parts of the city in between them. Obviously I have seen American Horror Story Coven like way too many times to just ignore it, and we will see some more American Horror Story right after the city of Bren. Now, the Bren castle is one of the inspirations for the castle of Dracula in the original Bram Stoker novel, and I created this design where I wrote out the name of the city from different Dracula related stuff. The letter B is a little hourglass that is filled with blood. I made this R out of a bunch of pictures of like caves and stones, and I hand painted the bats in the opening, and I hand painted the rays of light. I used a wooden texture in order to create these coffins, and it didn't look like an A enough, so I wrote an A on it in blood, and I used real pictures of this real castle in order to form this N out of different parts of the architecture. I need to lower my blinders because the sun is like coming up. Okay, that looks better. And here we have the giant love of my life, American Horror Story Murder House, also known as American Horror Story Season 1. I made a whole bunch of fan arts for this, including some that are on the channel. I did this little thing called photo bashing, where I started with a few pictures that were all exclusively screenshots from the actual series. It even says that I only used screenshots from the actual piece of media in order to construct the base for our little Tate and Violet here. And I did the rest with hand overpainting, including literal hand overpainting, because these hands were almost entirely overpainted by me in order to get their new context. And also, if you have seen the series itself, there are multiple hidden details on this picture. I'm giving you a hint. The character with the pill bottles and the rope is certain like mementos concerning the way of death for some characters, not necessarily the ones visible on this picture. Now, we had a little project where our teacher provided us with a list of his favorite movies, and I looked through the list saying, okay, there has to be at least one horror movie on here. I will take any horror movie that is on this list and I will make a poster for that. I don't care. There was not a single horror movie, and I even told this my teacher that I was hoping that there will be at least one, so I don't have to make something for a non-horror project, but unfortunately he's not really a horror person. So what I did is I picked this movie called Hidden Figures. By the way, I haven't seen like any other movie on the list that he provided, and I made a hand-drawn poster for the characters. This was the original, where it's a chalkboard drawing of the characters, where the starry sky transitions into a chalkboard, and then the 3 of them are drawn onto it, but this looks pretty iffy. So I made this alternative version where it's like somebody covered this with a whole bunch of chalk, and then the characters were like cleaned into the chalk, and that's why you have this negative image where actually the dark side shows the characters themselves. Pretty basic, but you know, a fun little project, and I would say that my teacher appreciated that. Here we have some funny posters with this fruit juice poster, where instead of putting fruits into a basket, what I did was I made this giant like Chernobyl apple that is that has a hole cut into it, and I put the baskets into the apple, and then I added some other fruits literally floating in the fruit juice that is inside these baskets, and I spent way too long like adding the actual moisture with like an adjustment layer that darkens parts of these baskets, adding the dripping effects, you know, hand painting all the highlights, hand painting so many things, and even editing this little box so it says basket flavored, and the baskets are on the cover. I just you know, edited out all the I think it was a bunch of oranges on the original picture. Actually, I have it in here. So here was the original orange picture that we had to use, and then I made an alternative version where the giant apple is filled with oranges, but this was like, my teacher asked me to do this, so it's not just the no context funny version. But here's my reasoning why this works, because this is not a poster for a product, it is a poster for the brand itself, and it's like a funny little poster that, hey, we also have basket favor. Would you think about that ever? No? Well, it already engraved itself into your memory and you will never forget the brand Huion. And here was a negative advertisement. And I made this with Michael Myers and Ghostface. And so this is a fictional kitchen knife brand that is being advertised here. And the text says, longer, thicker, it penetrates deeper. And here's a little piece of police tape that says, customers are dying for this. And a whole bunch of reviews from horror movie characters. Norman Bates says, my mother's favorite. Chucky says, now this is not some child's toy. And Jason Voorhees, who only gave 4 stars, said it is good enough for a backup weapon. And the idea here was that, okay, this is a negative advertisement, right? So I wanted to lean into, we're completely using pop culture, including, copyrighted pop culture characters, and it's like very trashy. It has some vulgar, dick jokes with the longer, thicker, it penetrates deeper. And then, the two characters have their knives compared to each other. And as it says here, it gives off the impression of a cheap and a less serious product, which can be a negative advertisement if you don't entirely lean into a trashy audience. Also, this is a completely original digital painting that I made for this. Funny story, I actually wanted to make this out of a bunch of pictures like these ones, but I was having a migraine attack when I started working on this, and I made a sketch and I just kept working on it, and I actually finished the entire illustration while barely being alive from a very incapacitating migraine attack. Here in the end, nearing the end, I used all my experience gathered from making my own comic in order to turn this poster into an actual comic book page. Now this poster explains that if you buy any of these products, you can either win an iPhone or this scooter. And I turned this into a little story that there's this barren wasteland and someone is trying to haul the baskets full of vegetables through this wasteland, and using the little iPhone as the navigation device, and the entire thing is formatted as a comic book page. Also, this thing, I didn't write this. This was actually in the text that was provided for us to use. I know what we are eating this summer, which is a direct reference to the movie called I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I didn't put it in here. This is completely something that was included in the assignment, and I really appreciated it. If I had both my hands, I would show like a little heart. I will do the heart like this. And even the little navigation device is telling you to go to their website or use their phone number to submit your code that you gather from some of these products. Here I included some of my own pixel graphics projects, some of my earlier digital paintings. Some of these even have videos on my channel about them. I think every single one of them has, except this one, and I still have the recordings, and I'm planning on doing this, but that has like a whole story behind it, and I'm not sure if it will ever happen. But I wanted to include some of my own earlier projects, just showing the stuff that I regularly do and the things that I'm more occupied with. And people can say that, okay, yeah, you can format this little page as a little comic book page. By the way, this was like a completely separate picture of a scooter, and like the vegetables came in like a whole bunch of stock photos, and I edited this all together. Like this took me like, I don't know, 5+ hours or something. But I wanted to include some of my original paintings that I do regularly in the portfolio to show that these are also pixelgraphics projects that I completed earlier. Now here we arrived to the final thing. I could even know what it's called in English. I said that way too many times. This is editing. I'm completely blanking. I don't know what it's called. It's editing like newspapers and books and all of those fun things that you can do in InDesign, which is a program I absolutely hate. And I mostly used Scribus for making this, which is also an open source alternative. For a fictional magazine poster, I used one of my earlier digital paintings of Sunshine being killed by Ghostface. This is for a very fun project that I did some time ago, and I still haven't finished entirely. I wanted to make different pictures of my characters getting killed by slasher villains, and this one says slash magazine, and the slash has been slashed in half and it's dripping with some blood. And that was the idea for the design. And you know, there's a little article: is competitive serial killing the sport of tomorrow? And here's a quote from the grandchild of Charles Manson, who says, "Finally, our family's influence has been recognized." This is just you know, this very trashy but very unique looking little magazine cover design, along with a mock-up where I literally took a picture of a few National Geographic magazines and I just edited them. So this is what they look like. Now here are two filler projects. I'm not even going to linger on them. This is a fictional menu for a pizzeria. I did like almost trashy grandpa's kind of pizzeria, which also has like vegan and vegetarian, pescatarian kind of products, and it's called Boot Pizzeria, which I used my own vector image of the boot from earlier and edited it on a pizza. That's the whole concept, that it's like a very trashy place. And here's a quote from Grandpa, who says, it's like an old Hungarian joke. It's like, for your health's sake, it is beneficial to eat a kilogram of dirt every year. And you know, nothing very special. And the other thing that is also nothing very special is some straight slop, if I may say so, a book cover from Romeo and Juliet. What is important about this little project is that this was an original test that we did. We had 2 hours to finish this from start to finish. We got a bunch of stock photos, and we got like some production photos of like a movie version of Romeo and Juliet. I don't think I ever saw any official version of it. When I was a teenager, we saw a production of Romeo and Juliet at like a local theater, but that's like, and also we read the original, but I've never seen any of the, oh wait, no, I actually saw the DiCaprio version. I'm completely forgetting about all the straight stuff. And here I show that I made this very quick like sketch collage where I just threw everything on the picture, and then I spent the last of like 1.5 hours carefully editing this, including like adding a little reflection of the faces in the sword blade that is placed in between the 2 characters. And I even had this little text here that says that things that I didn't have time for, so more careful adjustment layers, better and new cutouts for the characters. Like some of these cutouts were really quick, and also correcting little things with the brush tool. These would have been the things I would have done if we had the time for it, but it was only 2 hours. So I wanted to include this, that because of the time crunch, this is what we got, and these are the things that I would have done if things were different. Now my 2 other favorite projects at the end. For the magazine spread, I came up with a fictional artist who uses blood in their works, and I made a whole bunch of little A5 size watercolor pictures. These are not painted with blood, these are painted with red watercolor. And also, if you paint with blood, it's not gonna entirely look like this. In the end, it's going to be more brown than this. But what I did was I created these images, and like with the chocolate boxes, I found the one color that Pantone has that matches with them the most, and I made the entire spread using actually this only single one color this time. If I adjust the focus a little bit, so this entire spread, including the text itself, which was handwritten by me, is only made out of this one single red color, you know, including the little art section logo here and all the decoration items. And it's like a full article that I just came up with about this person. It's like an interview with a person who paints with blood, and it has like little tips that, you know, always use someone's blood who consented it, and always use sanitary equipment, and that it's hard to paint with blood. What are the things that you have to pay attention to, that practice with the watercolor first, and stuff like that. I just wanted to do something cute with this. Here are the scans of the little paintings that I used for creating this spread, and this is like absolutely one of those things where I said that, okay, I really I really want to make a thing like this with some sort of horror topic, with some sort of thing that I make like this, and you know, more things including traditional paintings. Talking about more things that include traditional paintings, this was the last thing that I ever did for this portfolio. I literally finished this on the day of the deadline. This is a book cover for Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein, and yes, I have the traditional painting of this character. Actually, it's like a little Easter egg that I used Elizabeth, Victor, and the monster in order to form a new creature instead of just the monster for the poster, for the cover art. Here are the steps that I took in order to create this, and I even made this little mock-up that shows how the book is going to look in your hands. And my idea for this one was that this is like a collector's item book. This is not a brand new book because I messed around a whole lot with the text, and it's much less readable this way, which is something that you're not supposed to do in publishing. But this is a book that everybody knows, and this cover is there to be more unique than all the other covers, and that is the selling point of it. And also I could be a little creative with it, and I even did this little reference that I used the 1818 as like a subtitle to Frankenstein, which is not a subtitle, that is like an edition number, because this novel has a very famous first 1818 version that was later edited into the version that most people ended up reading. And I even added this part where the back cover is ripped off, and you can literally see the very last page that even says "the end in the end." The end in the end. That's one of the sentences, and you can literally see the last paragraph of the novel. And I really wanted to make this unique, and I think I succeeded, and I wouldn't mind having an edition like this from this book. It is something that was very dear to my heart, and I really wanted to make this way, and I ended up finishing this and including it in the very last page of my portfolio, because this is the end. If you ignore the another featuring of my dead name, it's just a little disclaimer that everything except for a few elements has been made between 2024 October and 2026 March. Everything was made by me, and I didn't use any Gen AI for these. And just a little thank you note for my teachers and the fellow students and others who helped me during this time, and saying thank you in the end. So that is just the main portfolio itself, and alongside this we have the comic. In the last video I made a very quick flip through with this comic, so I will only show you the differences that I created. I remade the back cover. I included these two pictures, and I edited the little text, because originally it was just text just slapped onto it. Now the barcode is visible. Now my picture is not like huge, it was like this big in the other one. I have the copyright disclaimer, two of them actually, and I even included a little in memoriam picture for my father, who died in 2025 while I was taking this course, and who never got to live to see this comic. But actually the story of the main comic, not the sample but the entire Stitches chapter 1, was directly inspired by the weeks following my father's death, and that is something, there's something similar that happens in the story that the main character Sunshine has to go through. And I also edited this first page to include pictures of the characters when I explained what chapter 1 is about, what this little sample is about. Another, you know, little thank you note for everyone who helped me during this time. Aside from using a few adjustment layers to bring up the brightness of these pages because they were really dark in the original, I fixed a few little continuity errors that I found in the originals. For example, Sunshine here didn't have the lip piercing in their lip because I just didn't edit in the end, and I only noticed it after the pictures were all printed out. There was a continuity error where Willow changed the long sleeve shirts between these two pages. There's like a whole story behind how these two pages were not originally connected to each other, and these sleeves were originally gray, so it looked like this takes place at like a different day instead of just a few minutes later. And in the first print I even had one of these speech bubbles missing because I edited them a few times and it was missing from the picture. And I also reworked this panel a little bit to make Violet's picture a little bit less painful to look at. It still has some anatomy issues, and I want to completely redo this from scratch for the final version. I did some more adjustments to these two characters. Now the hair color of Bubbles is actually sort of matching between the two pictures, and the little bubbles are not missing from the necklace of Bubbles on that picture. There was a funny continuity error in this one. In the original, that Lee has their necklace on this picture, but then originally they didn't have it in here, like it completely disappeared. You couldn't see the little chain. And I added that back, and that was roughly all the edits that I made for this. Mostly, you know, just the backside and the inner cover, alongside with a few fixes and with making it much brighter, so it's not like you're looking into the black void. And here we have the blend documentation of the creation of this little comic sample. I included the actual progress images of the cover itself, like that was literally the first sketch that I made. And then here's a very rough first, not even a draft, it's like a halfway finished version of the characters, and then that is the final picture. Here at the start we have like a few words about the story itself, that how it's you know, slice of life urban fantasy with gothic horror elements, that is about 6 autistic non-binary monsters who are living in a found family, and this is telling stories about their life. And the 13 pages long sample is telling the story of the necklace of this character named Willow through the inclusion of a flashback. That is the main character called Sunshine Honeybee, who's a Frankensteinian monster. I had some inspirations, including, you know, the original gothic horror entire genre, and, you know, Wednesday and American Horror Story were really huge ones. I could have even included Monster High, which is a series and like franchise that I'm like only familiar with because of some videos I saw about them. And it just, it wasn't that much of a direct influence. It was more of that gave me the idea of creating Frankensteinian monsters partially in the first place. Here's a little page that just explains how I made the pages in a 5K digital canvas, and then they were resized in order to fit into the printing size. You know, how I actually edited the outlines of the entire pages, how the layout was set up for having the margins and the bleeds, you know, all sorts of technical stuff about how I made my digital pictures actually visible on a physically printed page. Some steps of progression. Here's a little explanation on how I simplified my workflow for working a little bit faster with the comics. First, I always made a little sketch about the characters, and then I made this half version which was only base color with shadows and without eyebrows, irises, eyelashes, and smaller details like stitches or scars, and then those were added in the final version alongside with the lights. And that is the faster progression of how I made my characters. When I place the text itself, I always placed the text first, and then I drew the little speech bubbles around them. And I always prioritize the important things and the characters, and then I drew the environments around them. And this picture is very dark and you can barely see, but the environment was like an afterthought that only shows the location of this hand, because the hand itself is the thing that is very important. And here's just a little inclusion of an original sketch and the final page for this one little scene. And about the text and the bubbles, I use this free font called Caslon Antique that gives you the impression of a penny dreadful newspaper from the 1800s. That was my whole concept. And the speech bubbles themselves, they are based on the like direct messaging interface of various social media apps. And here I also included like how the exact size and formatting of these texts and bubbles are in order to make it consistent. And every single one of my characters has a uniquely colored speech bubble that are a little bit tinted with one very specific color. I even included that 5 of them have a 10% opacity color with these ones, and Luna is the only exception who has a red one, whose speech bubble is a little bit more visible as something colored. Also, I don't want the comic to feature a page number, but instead it does have a day counter and, you know, the day little marker, and the day text also has its own attributes that are shown here. I even have this thing where based on how many lines you have on a speech bubble, I have their entire size in pixels for my work document, which was an important thing to do instead of just, you know, roughly drawing it around the text and calling it a day. Here's a picture of the cover itself, which was a completely handmade picture made out of like human skin material. Also, my voice is completely failing me by now, so let's keep it quick. Disclaimer that I didn't use any sort of generative AI or tracing for these pictures, but I did use a lot of photo reference, including taking pictures of myself, doing the facial expressions of my characters on the panels in order to help myself with creating them as well as I could. And here I included a few elements of visual storytelling, like how Willow's hair grows through the flashback that shows the passage of time. And there's that scene in the comic where Willow is trying to get out from a state of dissociation, and the speech bubbles are falling apart, and the amount of that effect shows the seriousness of the symptom in the moment. And as the scene progresses, this slowly changes back to its regular self. Sunshine has a pill bottle on the nightstand and a little wallet that has the same logo as Luna's channel, because it's like a merch wallet. And also the face of Lee pops up in between these two panels when Bubbles mentions them without saying their name out. Obviously, Lee has red eyes, and previously Willow called the identical red eyes of Luna beautiful, which is like a little nod towards the two of these characters having a relationship with each other. I made some parodies of different real-life products like the X and the Coca-Cola bottles. They are called Hex and Bela in my version. And obviously Willow has a collection of little funny t-shirts that make an appearance all through the little sample. And in the end we have yet another disclaimer that this was all created by me, and there is another thank you note for everyone who helped me through this journey. Yeah, this is getting destroyed. So that was my project for this graphics designer course, the final version of my only 13-page long sample of my comic, and a full graphics design portfolio, which would arguably be a really bad portfolio for including a whole bunch of things that are not really on point and just being way too long, way too unfocused. But we were required to make one that includes everything that we did, and for that reason this is something that is like the definitive portfolio that I have now for the course. Really, like, this is not for getting hired, this is for getting the final grade, and I'm gonna say that I made an acceptable job, or perhaps a little bit better than that. I will let you be the judge of that. But now is the time when I will say thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day, and create something, even if it's a really huge project like putting together a portfolio like this. I'm supposed to say something very small and achievable when I say that part of my outro, but okay, this this went off rails. But whatever you do with your little projects, don't forget to have fun while doing that. Farewell.